Welcome to another edition of Preaching Pointers, and you'll be able to see from the slide on the screen, as it were, that we're going to be looking in this edition at the 4 locations of sermon preparation. Now, one of the reasons for doing these videos is, in some respects, just to pass on what I've learned from others about preparing sermons and have found useful and helpful for myself. So today, these 4 locations of sermon preparation were not my creation or not my invention. I heard them from Peter Mead, who is a mentor with Cordeo Ministries based in Chippenham, England in the United Kingdom. And it was from him that I first heard about these 4 locations. And so I can't take the credit for the content of this particular video, but the 4 locations is still worth communicating about and telling you about. And as I said, I found it helpful for myself. So what are then the 4 locations of sermon preparation? Well, they are these. They are the study, the prayer closet, the cafe, and the pulpit. These may be literally 4 different locations for you, or it may all take place in the same location. So you might just be in the study, but in your mind and in your thinking, you need, if you like, if you're going to prepare your sermon, it will be helpful for you to travel through each of these 4 locations for sermon preparation. So the first one then is the study, and this is where we think of the preacher and the passage. So this is the place where the work is done in getting to grips with the passage that you've been asked to preach on or you've chosen to preach on, and with God's help, seeking to understand what God is trying to say through that particular passage. Fundamentally trying to ask the question, why has God included this passage in the Bible? What was he seeking to communicate through it? And so that's the question, if you're like, that you're wrestling with in the study. And so that's when you'll be reading the passage, trying to understand the passage and trying to find out, what exactly was God's key idea that he was trying to communicate through this passage. So that's what's happening in the study. It's where the preacher is wrestling with the passage. The next location is the prayer closet. As I said, it might be literally a different room that you go to, a different place that you go to. It may all happen in the same place. But this is about the preacher and prayer, and taking that time to bring the whole sermon preparation process to the Lord and ask for his help in understanding the passage, preparing the sermon, and ultimately delivering the sermon and having an impact upon your congregation or your listeners. Whilst we've put prayer closet as one specific location here, it goes without saying really that prayer should cover the whole process of sermon preparation. Prayer should be a part of all 4 locations. But I suppose the emphasis here around the prayer closet is that we should be taking time out with God specifically to pray through the whole process of the sermon preparation and delivery. The third location is the cafe, and that's where we think about the preacher and the people. If you can think about being in a cafe or imagine yourself in a cafe, you might be sitting there with your favorite coffee and watching people come and go. And you might have all sorts of different people coming in and out. There might be single people, families, young people, senior citizens, unemployed people, students, professional business people, a whole host of people with different circumstances and different lives. And I suppose it's about asking, how is that message, which I've been wrestling with in the study, going to be relevant to these people with their lives? So it's thinking about your audience, thinking about the people that you're going to be speaking to, and thinking, well, how can what God has shown me in the study, how is that relevant to their lives? And thinking about, well, how am I going to communicate that relevance to their lives? And I suppose that brings us on then to the fourth location, which is the pulpit. So having spent time in the cafe, so to speak, to think about your audience, we then, when we get to the preacher and the pulpit, we're thinking about, well, you know, how can I deliver the message gleaned in the study in a relevant way for my audience that will help and benefit them in some way? And so that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about the location of the pulpit, communicating the message to the audience. And I suppose this idea of communication would be another way of describing these four locations. So the study is the place where we receive communication from God. We're looking for his help by his Spirit in giving us understanding in the passage and helping us to know what he was trying to communicate when he included that particular passage in the Bible. The prayer closet is the place where we're not so much receiving communication from God, but we're communicating to God or communicating with God over the whole process of the sermon preparation, the passage understanding, and ultimately the sermon delivery. When we get to the cafe, we're thinking about communicating for the people. Who is my audience? How can I communicate for their benefit? And then with the pulpit, we're thinking about communicating to the people. This is the message I've gleaned in the study. How can I communicate it in a way which is relevant to the audience that is before me? So those are the four locations for sermon preparation: the study, which is about the preacher and the passage; the prayer closet, which is about the preacher and prayer; the cafe, which is about the preacher and the people; and then the pulpit, which is about the preacher and the pulpit, thinking about how you can relevantly communicate the message to your audience. So again, I hope you found this little video about the four locations of sermon preparation helpful. If you did, then please like this video and also subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for listening to another edition of Preaching Pointers.